Well, Aurora Miners will have to wait another year before they can expect any payment from Khulubuse Zuma's settlement after 6 years of court battles. The former Aurora director finally agreed to pay 23 million rand. Let's talk about this some more now. Karyn Maughan's been keeping track of the story. Karyn, good morning. Just take us back a little bit for anybody who doesn't quite remember the case as to where all of this started. What was the issue?
Well, essentially what happened was there's a liquidation process of these Khulubuse mines, which were owned by Aurora. And essentially what happened was that Judge Eberhard Bertelsmann found that Khulubuse Zuma and Aurora Miners and their associates on the mine had actually acted recklessly in terms of their business management of that mine. You'll remember that they had bought the mine and then according to what we understand, had tried to raise the money to make the mine operational and were unable to do so. And then on the version of the liquidators and ultimately the court essentially looted the mine according to the tune of about 1.5 billion rand. Now, they've disputed that amount. They say it's a gross exaggeration. But essentially what that meant was that the miners there were left without jobs. And in a liquidation process, you have lawyers who are trying to essentially get as much money or recover as much money as they can from a failed business so they can pay the creditors. And in this instance, we know Eskom is a creditor, but we also know these 5,300 miners, many of whom have remained there living in abject poverty without electricity, without anything, to try and give them just, some small amount of the money that they're owed back. And they are really the tragic human heart at the center of the story.
Now, just looking at some reports this morning that Khulubuse Zuma saying, I only have 3,000 rand left in my bank account. I don't know where I'm going to find the money. We know he's lived in quite a bit of luxury over the years. What's he saying about, he's agreed after all of this to pay the 23 million rand in damages. What else is he saying about how he plans to do this?
Well, remember that he's paying it off in installments. Yeah. So apparently he's paid like 5 million rand, and then he's got subsequent installments of like 100,000 rand a month. So, there's a real question there about how that's actually going to end up trickling down to the miners when there's so many legal costs involved and so much other. We know that 2 of his associates have actually been sequestrated. They've got provisional sequestration, which essentially means you can't trade, you can't, it basically cripples you in the business sense. So he was kind of between a rock and a hard place, because if he hadn't paid this money or found some kind of financial arrangement to make, he would have been completely destroyed within the business environment. I spoke to his lawyer yesterday and I said, you've got these very adverse findings made against him. This isn't some negligent little accident that happened. This was whole-scale stripping of assets, etc., etc. Does he not feel any moral blameworthiness? And he said, Ulrich Roos, saying that no, he does feel very sorry about everything that's happened, and he does hope that the miners will get some kind of money. But in the end of the day, that's very doubtful. And considering that amount that was alleged to have been stripped from the mine, which they, of course, are disputing, the 1.5 billion. This assertion from him that I only have 3,000 rand in my bank account is somewhat strange.
Well, also looking at, as they continue this process and the liquidators are on their search, they're also going to be looking into his alleged oil interests in the DRC. Remember the Panama Papers.
Absolutely.
And all the details coming out there. And also the family estate of his former partners, that's Solly Faisal and Zubaydah Bana.
Yeah. Well, you see, the thing is with the liquidation process, essentially it's following the money. And that's why liquidation processes, and sometimes can actually culminate in criminal proceedings. We've seen this with, for instance, the Lolly Jackson estate with, SARS. Where SARS is in this whole situation is also very intriguing to me, because there's been a lot of silence on that particular issue. As you rightly point out, we have the Panama Papers. We know that Pravin Gordhan at that stage was saying that if anyone had information linked to the Panama Papers and, whoever was implicated in that scenario, they should come to Treasury. We don't know what's happened with that. But essentially with the liquidation process, it is about following the money. These guys are out there to recover what they can to pay the creditors. And if there is a suggestion that, for instance, money that was taken from this mine or related to this business has somehow been funneled elsewhere to avoid being, either identified by the tax revenue authorities or by the liquidators themselves, the liquidators can take measures to recover that money and potentially institute criminal charges if they feel that that is warranted.
All right, so what now? I mean, how long does this process take? Like we've been saying, it could take up to a year for these mine workers to get any kind of compensation out of all of this. What happens next? Who makes the next move, and what happens while the liquidators are at work?
Well, essentially it's up to the liquidators. I mean, they're in control of the process. I mean, I think the very sad scenario is that we've got 5,300 people. If you're paying off 100,000 Rand a month, they're going to have to make decisions about who gets that money first and how do they get that money. But I mean, in the end of the day, it's probably in some small kind of moral, ethical, victory for them, but it's going to have very, very little impact on the actual lived reality of their situation right now.
All right, thanks for that insight, and that's eNCA's Karyn Maughan just giving us the details of the entire Aurora story involving Khulubuse Zuma. Well,